Being black in America means you can do everything right and still can end up in handcuffs. Malik knew that feeling. He wasn't loud, he wasn't aggressive, he was calm, respectful. But none of that mattered when he stepped into that police station. They didn't see a man trying to clear his name. They saw a suspect, a target, a threat. And before he could even speak, one of them hit him, hard. And just like that, Malik was on the floor, bruised, silent, alone. But here's what they didn't know. Malik wasn't just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was the right man, with the right knowledge, at the exact moment the system needed to be exposed. Behind that calm stare was a man with a secret, a title that held more power than anyone in that room. And when the truth came out, the same officers who mocked him panicked. This story isn't just about one man getting justice. It's about every person who's ever been overlooked. Every time someone was told to stay quiet, don't make it worse, or let it go. Malik didn't let it go. He stood up, he fought back, and he did it with the kind of strength you don't learn in school, the kind you carry from generations of surviving what others never had to. If this story hits home, stick around, because when Malik's truth is revealed, the entire system shakes, and the people who thought they were untouchable, they learn the hard way, justice doesn't care about your badge. The faint hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the quiet police station. It was late in the afternoon, and the building felt like it was caught between two worlds. Just enough activity to keep it running, but the kind of stillness that usually precedes something unpredictable. Malik Johnson stepped through the front door, his footsteps muffled by the worn linoleum tiles beneath him. His navy jacket, simple and unassuming, hung loosely over his broad shoulders, and his worn sneakers made little noise as he walked up to the front desk. "Can I help you, sir?" The officer at the counter, a young man with a tired look in his eyes, barely glanced up from his paperwork. The kind of officer who had been working long shifts and could hardly muster the energy for small talk. Malik's voice was steady. "I'm here to file a report, a case of racial profiling earlier today. I'd like to get it on record." The officer nodded, still half focused on his paperwork. "Take a seat over there," he said, gesturing toward a row of chairs near the entrance. Malik followed the officer's lazy gesture, his fingers brushing against the back of a plastic chair as he settled in. The station was old, its walls covered in faded bulletin boards, the smell of coffee and stale air lingering in the corners. He had been here before, too many times in fact, but today felt different. There was a sense of heaviness in the air, a low hum of tension that seemed to come from more than just the flickering lights. A few moments passed before the door at the far end of the room opened with a sharp squeak. Officer Grant, tall and muscular with a reputation for being tough, stepped in. His uniform was perfectly pressed and his badge gleamed under the harsh light. He had been here for years and everyone knew his attitude. He didn't exactly have a reputation for tact, and his disdain for people of color was something that was whispered about more often than directly addressed. Grant's eyes swept over the room, stopping when he noticed Malik sitting by the counter. A slow, mocking grin crept across his face as he made his way toward the desk. He had that look, confident, maybe even arrogant, like he was used to getting his way. Well, what do we have here?" Officer Grant's voice was loud enough to make the other officers in the room glance up. "A concerned citizen? Or just someone who's got a bone to pick with the law?" Malik stayed seated, his expression unreadable. He didn't flinch. "I'm here to file a report, that's it," he said, keeping his tone even. Grant didn't take the hint. He chuckled, stepping closer to Malik, his boots tapping the floor like a drum beat. "A report? On what exactly? Did you get into some kind of incident today? With the police, no less?" He leaned in a little, his voice dripping with mockery. "Sounds like a real waste of time." The air between them thickened. Malik could feel the shift in the room, the subtle tension in the way the other officers, sitting at their desks or leaning against the walls, tried to pretend they weren't watching. They'd all seen Grant's attitude before. They knew what he was capable of, and they knew how he treated people, especially black people. It wasn't new, but this time Malik wasn't backing down. "I've got no time to waste," Malik said, his voice a little colder now. "I'm here to make sure my voice is heard." Grant narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. He was pushing it now, too comfortable in his own skin. "You might want to rethink that. People like you come in here all the time, wasting our time. You think anyone's going to care about your complaint?" Malik didn't flinch. "I'm sure you'll find out soon enough." Grant's lips curled into a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The way he looked at Malik was a mixture of challenge and disdain, like this was some game to him, a game he fully intended to win. But Malik wasn't here to play. Malik sat quietly in the corner of the police station, the hum of the fluorescent lights doing nothing to calm his nerves. His legs were crossed, but his mind was racing. He glanced at the clock on the wall, just a few more minutes before the sergeant would call him in to formally file the report. He had already noticed the looks, the whispered conversations that quieted as he passed. Some of the officers, who hadn't given him a second glance in previous visits, were now openly eyeing him, their expressions unreadable. It was subtle, but the shift was there. This wasn't the typical reception he'd gotten in the past. Something was different. As the minutes dragged by, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and his grip tightened on the folder of documents he had brought with him. He could feel the unease in the room, the way the space felt charged, like a spark waiting to catch fire. The station's normally neutral atmosphere had taken on a strange, almost hostile tone. He didn't know how long he could stand the silence before it cracked. The door to the back office opened and Sergeant Harris emerged. He was a tall man with a face that looked like it had seen too many long shifts. His expression was unreadable as he scanned the room and saw Malik sitting there. "Mr. Johnson?" he called out, his voice sharp but not unfriendly. Malik stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket, and walked toward the desk where the sergeant stood. "Yes, that's me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing tension. Sergeant Harris nodded curtly and gestured to the back office. "Come with me. Let's get this over with." As they walked down the narrow hallway to the back office, Malik's mind raced again. The thought of filing the report felt heavier now, like it wasn't just about bringing attention to the situation. It was about something bigger, something that could make or break his career and possibly his safety. He sat down across from Sergeant Harris, who didn't immediately speak. Instead, he simply watched Malik, his eyes a little too calculating. "I understand you're here to file a report about Officer Grant," Harris said after a moment, his voice careful. "What happened?" Malik recounted the events of earlier, telling the sergeant how Grant had mocked him, how his behavior had been inappropriate and unprofessional. The whole time, Harris didn't interrupt, though his expression shifted between neutrality and subtle discomfort. When Malik finished, Harris let out a sigh. "I'll make sure your complaint gets processed, Mr. Johnson, but you should know, it's not always easy to bring an officer like Grant to heel. He's been here a long time." Malik nodded. "I understand, but this isn't about personal feelings. It's about fairness." Sergeant Harris studied him for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Fairness, huh? Well, I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up too high." Malik barely made it out of the station before his phone buzzed. He fished it out of his pocket and saw the message. It was from an unknown number, the message short and blunt. "You've made a big mistake." His stomach tightened. A warning, no doubt. But from who? Officer Grant? Someone else in the station? He couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at him as he stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. He slid the phone back into his pocket and glanced around the dimly lit parking lot. No one was watching, at least not that he could see, but that didn't ease the unease creeping into his chest. He started walking toward his car, eyes darting to every shadow as he went. Just as he reached his car, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Malik spun around, but the street was empty. He hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't seen anyone in the dark corners of the lot, but the sensation of being watched was undeniable. He fumbled with his keys, trying to unlock the car, but his hands felt like they were trembling. Before he could get the door open, a voice called from behind him. Well, well, well. Looks like the little troublemaker made it out alive. Malik froze. The voice was unmistakable. Officer Grant's voice. He turned slowly, keeping his back to the car. There, in the shadowed corner of the parking lot, was Grant, standing just outside the glow of the streetlights. He was alone, but Malik could see the glint of something in his hand. An object, but it was too far away to make out. "You really think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of something?" Grant sneered, his posture threatening. "You don't know who you're messing with." Malik kept his calm, his voice measured. "I'm just filing a report. You're the one who escalated it." Grant took a step closer, his grin widening. "Don't be so naive. You think you're the first person to try and take me down? You're nothing but a blip on the radar. You've already made an enemy, a big one." Malik felt the weight of his words sink in. This wasn't just about a report anymore. This was about survival, and now Grant had him in his sights. The next few days passed in a haze. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The ominous message, Grant's threat, it all weighed on him like a stone in his gut. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. The wheels of his investigation were already turning, and he couldn't afford to stop. Yet no matter where he went, he felt eyes on him. At the office, on the streets, in the grocery store, he was hyper-aware of every passing glance, every car that lingered too long. The paranoia, which had been a distant feeling at first, now seemed to be taking over. Malik decided to go over his steps, retracing his interactions with everyone involved. Grant had been the obvious antagonist, but Malik couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story, something deeper, more organized than just one cop going rogue. He went through the records he had gathered, his fingers brushing over names and incidents that now seemed to carry a different weight. Something about it didn't sit right, and then there it was, a connection he had missed before. The pattern of complaints, all tied to the same officers, in different precincts. The reports were scattered across the city, like pieces of a larger puzzle. Malik stared at the information for a long moment, the truth dawning on him with cold clarity. Officer Grant wasn't acting alone. He was part of something much bigger, a network, and they were watching him. Malik had to act fast. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. He knew he couldn't trust the people around him, not entirely. There were leaks everywhere, and it seemed like every time he uncovered something new, it got him one step closer to the edge. He had already lost one ally in the department. Sarah, a detective he had worked with in the past, had been the first to notice his growing suspicions. He called her, but she hadn't returned his messages. That was enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. Malik sat in his small office, the blinds closed and the door locked. He was going over his notes when his phone buzzed. Another anonymous text, but this one was different. "Stay out of it or you'll regret it." He looked at the screen for a long moment, the words feeling like a final warning. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together too fast, and Malik was quickly realizing that there was no safe way to back out now. The next steps were crucial. He needed to gather evidence, but he also needed to be careful. Whoever was behind this, whether it was Grant or someone higher up, wasn't just playing games. They were capable of anything, and now Malik had a decision to make. Just as Malik was about to leave the office, his phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a threatening text. It was a call, and the voice on the other end was one he didn't expect to hear. "Malik, it's me, Jim. I know what's going on. I can help." Jim was an old friend, a reporter who had dug into police corruption before. Malik hadn't seen him in months, and he hadn't expected Jim to be involved in any of this. "Are you sure about this?" Malik asked, his voice low, the weight of the conversation heavy. "It's not just some isolated incident. This runs deep." Jim's voice was steady, but there was an edge of concern there. "I know, but I've been following the story. I've got some information that could blow it all wide open." Malik hesitated for a moment before responding. "Meet me tonight. We'll talk. But this has to stay between us." He could feel the walls closing in. But now, for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. Jim could be the key to exposing the network and taking down Grant for good. Malik arrived at the cafe a little earlier than planned, pacing back and forth outside, the late-night air cool against his skin. The city had a different feel at night, quieter, almost suffocating in its stillness. Every car that passed seemed to carry the weight of secrets, every shadow deeper than it should have been. He checked his phone again. No messages from Jim yet. Malik had been careful not to let anyone know about the meeting, but he had to admit, his gut was telling him that something was off. He glanced up as a car pulled into the parking lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. But it wasn't Jim's car. Instead, a figure stepped out of a black sedan, a tall man with a dark coat that blended into the night. Malik's instincts flared. This wasn't Jim, not even close. Malik instinctively moved a step away, but before he could make a clean getaway, the man called out, "You're Malik Johnson, right? The guy making noise about Officer Grant?" His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't supposed to happen. His cover was too thin, and the mention of Grant's name made Malik's blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," Malik said, keeping his tone steady, though his eyes darted toward the street. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think you do. Don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "But you've got people in very high places watching you now, and not in a good way." Malik's grip tightened on his jacket, and he straightened his back. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, though his voice wavered just slightly. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he glanced at the cafe's door, then leaned in, his words barely above a whisper. "If you want to see your friend Jim again, you'll stop digging into this. Right now. You're in over your head, and we both know it." The message was clear. He wasn't just talking about Grant anymore. This was something deeper, something far more dangerous. Malik felt his chest tighten. "You can't silence me," Malik said, trying to sound confident. The man smiled again, but this time it felt cold. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, disappearing into the darkness. Malik stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what had just transpired sinking in. Whoever this person was, they weren't just a low-level threat, they were connected to something powerful. Malik had no doubt that his investigation had just crossed into dangerous territory. He checked his phone again, but still no word from Jim. Malik's sense of urgency skyrocketed. He needed to move, and fast. Malik met Jim in the back corner of the cafe, a place where the dim lighting allowed them to speak without drawing attention. Jim was already sitting, his fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, his eyes darting around the room nervously, as if expecting someone to recognize him. "Jim?" Malik said quietly, sitting down across from him. "What's going on? Who was that guy? What do you know?" Jim looked up at him, his expression tense. "That guy, he's connected. Real deep, Malik, and I think he's the one calling the shots here. I've been following Grant's actions for weeks now. This whole thing goes way beyond him." Malik felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean? You're telling me Grant's not the only one involved?" Jim leaned in closer, his voice barely audible. "Grant's just a pawn, Malik, a puppet. The real people running this? They've been using him to cover up a series of bigger crimes that have been going on for years. Illegal operations, drug deals, and even extortion. And it all ties back to some of the highest-ranking officials in the department." Malik's mind raced. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it out loud made the situation all the more real and terrifying. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Malik demanded, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. Jim's gaze softened. "I couldn't. There are people out there who have eyes everywhere. I've been digging, and I've almost gotten enough proof to bring it all down, but I've had to be careful. You can't just go barging in without knowing what you're up against." Malik nodded, processing the information. It was worse than he had imagined. These weren't just rogue cops. This was a whole system of corruption, stretching far beyond anything he had ever encountered. "How do we stop it?" Malik asked, his voice resolute. Jim sighed and looked around, his eyes scanning for anyone who might be watching. It's going to take more than just the two of us. We need concrete evidence, proof that can't be ignored. But more importantly, we need to be smart about how we play this. One wrong move, and we're both done. Malik's chest tightened with a mix of fear and determination. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "We'll get the proof," Malik said, "and we'll make sure they pay for what they've done." Malik and Jim spent the next few days working in the shadows, gathering information and carefully piecing together the puzzle. They knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. Every step they took was carefully calculated, every decision scrutinized. Time was running out, and the more they uncovered, the more dangerous things became. Malik found a key piece of evidence, a recording of a conversation between Officer Grant and someone he didn't recognize. The conversation was damning, filled with references to bribes, cover-ups, and orders to intimidate certain witnesses. But the biggest revelation came when Grant mentioned names of high-ranking officers, city officials, and even business leaders. People in positions of power who were all too eager to turn a blind eye. "We've got it," Malik said to Jim as he played the recording back one last time. "This is the smoking gun." Jim was quiet for a moment before nodding. "It's perfect, but we can't just drop it in the wrong hands. We need to go to the press. Make sure it gets the attention it deserves." Malik agreed, but there was a nagging feeling in his gut. The more they dug, the more it felt like they were being watched. They couldn't trust anyone, not even the press. What if someone from within was already onto them? As they made their plan, Malik couldn't shake the thought that they were walking straight into a trap. It was too easy, too smooth. And then it hit him. What if this is all part of the plan? Malik muttered under his breath. Jim looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "The people behind this. What if they're waiting for us to make the next move? What if they know exactly what we're going to do?" Suddenly, everything felt like it was closing in. The walls were tightening, and Malik realized just how vulnerable they truly were. The next morning, everything went south. They had scheduled a meeting with a trusted journalist, someone Jim knew well, to hand over the evidence. Malik drove to the meeting point, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. He kept checking the rearview mirror, feeling the weight of every passing car. When they arrived, Jim got out first, his face tight with determination. Malik followed close behind, but as he reached for the door, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. 3 unmarked cars parked near the building. Before he could process it, he heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Move, Malik!" Jim shouted, but it was too late. A group of masked men appeared from around the corner, guns drawn. "You're both coming with us," one of them growled. Malik froze. Betrayal. It was Jim, the one person he thought he could trust, who had led him straight into the lion's den. "Jim, what's going on?" Malik's voice was filled with confusion and disbelief. Jim's expression was cold, the lines of his face hardening as he turned toward Malik. "I didn't have a choice." And with that, everything shifted. The man who had been an ally, a friend, was now his captor. As the men shoved Malik into the back of one of the cars, he realized that the trap had been set long before he ever stepped into the cafe, and now it was too late to turn back. The car sped through the night, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Malik's mind raced, processing the events that had unfolded too quickly. He could barely comprehend what Jim had just done. Betrayal. He thought they were on the same side, but now it was clear that Jim had made a deal with the enemy. The masked men didn't say a word as they drove, their eyes never leaving Malik, their hands poised on their weapons. He sat in the back, his hands cuffed behind him, his body tense. Sweat clung to his forehead as his mind scrambled for a plan. If Jim had truly turned on him, there was no telling who else was involved. Everyone he thought he could trust was now a question mark. But Malik wasn't one to sit idly by. He had spent his life learning how to think on his feet, how to navigate tight spots, and how to outsmart those who thought they were in control. As the car made a sharp turn, Malik noticed the dimly lit alley up ahead, A perfect spot for an ambush. His heart pounded in his chest. "Think, Malik. Think," he whispered to himself. "This is your chance." The car slowed down as it approached the alley. Malik's eyes darted around, searching for anything that could be used to his advantage. He spotted a loose wire from a streetlight hanging just above his head. It was flimsy, but it might give him just the edge he needed. He had to time it perfectly. The car came to a complete stop. One of the men got out, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. Malik waited, his heart hammering in his chest. The second the man's back was turned, Malik twisted his body and slammed his shoulder into the window, breaking the glass with a violent crash. His movements were sharp and calculated. He didn't have much time. The man outside the car turned in surprise, but it was already too late. Malik had already forced his arm through the broken window, grabbing the wire and using it to cut his restraints. In one swift motion, he yanked the door open and rolled out onto the pavement. The other two men scrambled to react, but Malik was already on his feet, moving with purpose. He ran as fast as he could down the alley, his pulse racing. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting and the sound of footsteps pounding after him. But Malik knew this area. He had spent years here, dodging trouble, knowing where to hide. He turned a sharp corner and slipped into an abandoned building. The men were getting closer. Malik's breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around, searching for a way out. The building was old, with broken windows and empty rooms, but it was perfect for what he needed. He could use it to throw off their pursuit. Malik moved quickly, ducking into a room and hiding behind a stack of old crates. His heart was still pounding, but his mind had already shifted into overdrive. He had to keep his cool. He could not afford to make any mistakes. Not now. Malik had barely caught his breath when he heard the footsteps approaching. His heart skipped a beat as he tightened his grip on a rusty metal pipe he had found on the ground. The shadows seemed to stretch on forever. The building eerily silent, save for the sound of his breathing. He listened intently, waiting for the slightest sound. Just when he thought they were right on top of him, a figure appeared in the doorway, an unexpected silhouette against the faint moonlight. Malik instinctively grabbed the pipe, ready to defend himself. "Easy, man. I'm not here to hurt you." The voice was familiar, but still, Malik couldn't trust anyone. Not after everything that had happened. The figure stepped closer, the dim light revealing his face. It was Jamal, an old acquaintance from Malik's past, someone he hadn't seen in years. Jamal had once been part of the same network of street-savvy people Malik had run with before getting involved in more legitimate work. Jamal had always been a bit of a wild card, resourceful, unpredictable, and above all, someone who knew how to stay alive. "What the hell are you doing here?" Malik whispered, lowering the pipe but still keeping a wary eye on Jamal. "I could ask you the same thing, man," Jamal replied, glancing nervously around. "I've been watching those cops. I don't know who you pissed off, but they've been looking for you. Hard." Malik's eyes narrowed. "Why are you helping me?" Jamal smirked. "Let's just say I've got my own reasons. I've been following you for a while, Malik. I know what's going on, and I think we could work together on this." Malik's instincts screamed at him to run, but he had to admit, Jamal was his best chance right now. "All right," Malik said, his voice low. "I need your help. They have Jim, and I think he's working with them." Jamal's eyes flickered with recognition. "Damn, that's bad." "All right, we need to move fast. There's a safe house not far from here. I can get us there. You're going to need a place to lay low." Malik nodded, his mind still reeling from the betrayal. "Let's go, but we move quick." As they slipped out of the building, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. The hunt wasn't over, but now with Jamal at his side, there was a chance, just a chance, that Malik could get to the bottom of what had really been happening. Jamal led Malik through winding streets, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main roads. Malik's mind raced with thoughts of Jim, the corruption, and the risks he was taking by trusting Jamal. Every time they passed a corner, Malik expected to see headlights or hear the sound of sirens, but the streets were empty, silent. Eventually, they reached a small, nondescript house at the edge of a residential neighborhood. The door creaked open as Jamal inserted a key into the lock, and they stepped inside. "This place should be secure for now," Jamal said, looking around. The interior was sparse. No unnecessary clutter, just the basics. A small couch, a table, a few chairs. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Malik immediately went to the small kitchen area, grabbing a glass of water. His nerves were shot, his body exhausted. He needed rest, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not yet. "We have to make a move tomorrow," Malik said. "We can't stay here long." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "I've got some contacts I can reach out to. People who owe me favors. We'll find out who's behind all this, Malik. We'll make sure Jim doesn't get away with this." Malik's throat tightened. "I don't know what happened with him, but I don't trust him anymore. He's part of this mess. I can feel it." Jamal set his jaw. "I know, man. I know. But we can't let that cloud our judgment. We need to focus on the bigger picture." Malik stood still for a moment, his mind racing. He had to figure out who was really pulling the strings, who had been orchestrating the entire operation. He needed to know how far the corruption went. "We'll get them all," Malik said, his voice steely with resolve. "Every single one." The next morning, Malik woke early, his body still tense from the events of the previous night. He hadn't slept much, his mind running over every detail of the situation. He had to get to the bottom of it. He couldn't stop now. Jamal was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, a phone pressed to his ear. Malik could hear him talking in low tones, his voice barely audible as he paced back and forth. He waited until Jamal hung up, then approached. "Who was that?" Jamal shot him a quick glance before answering. "A contact I trust. They've got some information on Jim. Looks like he's been seen at a meeting with some high-ranking people. People who have serious connections." Malik's stomach churned. "Grant's people?" Jamal nodded. "Looks like it. We need to move fast. I don't know how much longer Jim's gonna be with them. He could be in danger." Malik clenched his fists. "Then we need to get to him before they do. I'm done waiting." Jamal's eyes locked onto Malik's. "I'm with you, man. But we've got to be smart about this. We can't rush in blind." Malik's mind was already set. The time for being cautious was over. He had to take control of the situation. He wasn't just fighting for Jim anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. Malik and Jamal set off toward the location Jim was last seen, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As they approached, Malik's chest tightened with anticipation. He could feel it in his bones. This was the moment. They crept around the back of the warehouse, staying low and quiet, avoiding the guards stationed at the front. The building was massive, dark, and foreboding. The shadows seemed to stretch out before them, a metaphor for the dangerous path Malik had chosen. Inside, Malik's eyes scanned the room, finally landing on Jim, who was standing with a group of men Malik didn't recognize. The tension was palpable as Malik stepped forward, ready to confront his former friend. "Jim!" Malik's voice echoed through the room, making everyone freeze. Jim turned slowly, his face hardening when he saw Malik. "I didn't think you'd make it this far." Malik stepped closer, his voice steady despite the anger rising in his chest. "You've betrayed me. You've betrayed everything we fought for." Jim's gaze flickered with guilt, but he didn't back down. "I had no choice. You don't understand what's at stake." "No, Jim," Malik said, his voice sharp. "I understand perfectly. And I'm going to make sure you pay for this." The confrontation was inevitable. Both men stood on opposite sides, a friendship shattered by betrayal. But in that moment, it was clear that only one would walk away from this. Malik's hand tightened around the metal pipe he had found earlier, its cold, rough surface grounding him in the chaos of the moment. The air was thick with tension. He could feel every muscle in his body screaming for action, but he knew he had to remain focused. This wasn't just about his survival anymore. It was about everything he stood for. He had to make sure that the corruption, the lies, the betrayal, everything came to light. Jim, standing in front of Malik with his back slightly hunched, looked like a man who had aged years in the span of a few days. The weariness in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was the arrogance. He had made his choices, and now he was going to own them, one way or another. His hand lingered near his waist, close to the gun he always carried. A gun that, at this moment, felt like the only thing standing between him and the consequences of his actions. "You think you can take me down, Malik?" Jim's voice was rough, like it had been dragged through 100 tough conversations. "You've got no idea what's going on here." Malik took a slow step forward, keeping his eyes locked on Jim. His heartbeat was steady, his mind clear. "I know enough, and I'm not walking away until you're held accountable." Jim smirked, but there was no real humor behind it. "You don't even understand the game you're in, man. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. You're just a pawn in someone else's game." The words stung, but Malik refused to show it. He had heard similar threats before. He had seen them used to intimidate weaker people, to bend them to someone else's will. But Malik wasn't weak. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. The room was tense. Behind Malik, Jamal had positioned himself near the door, ready for anything. He knew this was the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Malik's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unwavering. "I'm not here to play your game. I'm here to end it." Jim's eyes flickered with something that might have been fear, but before Malik could react, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. A group of men burst through the side door, guns drawn and aimed straight at Malik. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the sound of a gunshot rang out, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Malik dove for cover, heart pounding. He had no choice now but to fight his way out. As bullets flew, Malik's mind raced. This was no longer just a matter of uncovering the truth. His life was on the line. The gunfire erupted like thunder in a storm, deafening and chaotic. Malik's mind raced with adrenaline as he dropped to the floor, the sharp whizzing of bullets close enough to make his skin crawl. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had thought he had control, but now everything was unraveling. He heard the sound of footsteps, the scuffling of boots against the concrete floor. His eyes flickered around, desperate for an escape, but the door he had come through was already blocked by more men, more guns. He was trapped. And yet Malik wasn't giving up. He'd come this far. He couldn't let fear control him now. "Jamal!" Malik yelled, hoping his voice would carry through the noise. "We need to move!" Jamal's voice came back, strained but clear. "I'm working on it. Just hold on, Malik!" Malik glanced over at Jim, who had somehow managed to avoid the barrage of bullets. He was ducking behind a crate, his eyes flicking around as if he were searching for an escape. But Malik knew Jim's time was running out. He couldn't keep hiding forever. And in truth, Malik didn't want him to. The door burst open with a loud bang, and a new figure stepped into the room, taking Malik by surprise. It was an officer, someone he hadn't seen before. His uniform was standard, but the look in his eyes told Malik that this was no ordinary cop. The officer's movements were precise, calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Malik!" the officer called out over the chaos. "Get down!" Malik didn't need to be told twice. He hit the ground just as another volley of bullets was fired. The officer took cover beside him, pulling out his own weapon with practiced ease. "I'm with you," the officer said, his voice cold. "We need to get out of here, now." Malik was stunned. "Who the hell are you?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he signaled to Jamal, who was crouched near the far corner, his gun raised. "I've been watching this operation for weeks," the officer finally said, his gaze locked on Jim. "And I'm not about to let it fall apart now." Malik didn't know who this officer was, but he knew one thing. He was the ally Malik needed. The seconds felt like hours as Malik and the officer ducked behind crates, moving through the warehouse with precision. The gunfire had died down for the moment, but Malik knew that wouldn't last long. The enemies were regrouping, and they were pissed. "We need to move," the officer urged. The longer we stay here, the worse it's gonna get. Malik nodded, his chest tightening as he tried to think of a way out. He had to find Jim. If Jim was still alive, then maybe there was a chance to stop this madness. But the officer's presence had shifted the equation. This man, whoever he was working for something bigger. Maybe even the same thing Malik had been trying to uncover. "Where's Jim?" Malik asked, his voice urgent. The officer pointed toward the far side of the warehouse. "He's still alive, but barely. We need to move fast before they come for him." Malik didn't hesitate. He knew the clock was ticking, and he wasn't about to let his former partner slip away, no matter how deep in trouble he was. The two men sprinted across the warehouse, ducking and weaving through obstacles. They could hear the sound of boots pounding behind them, closer with every second. But they couldn't stop now. There was too much at stake. Malik's mind raced as they reached the far side of the warehouse. He spotted Jim in the distance, huddled near the wall, looking more terrified than Malik had ever seen him. Jim's eyes widened when he saw Malik. "Malik!" Jim yelled, his voice hoarse. "Get out of here! It's not safe!" But Malik wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't leaving Jim to face this alone. "You're coming with me," Malik said, his voice firm. Malik barely had time to react before the sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. His heart sank as he recognized the officer from earlier, his face now twisted in a smirk. "Not so fast, Malik," the officer said, his voice dripping with malice. "I think we both know who the real problem here is." Malik's stomach churned as he realized the truth. The officer was no ally. He was part of the very system Malik had been trying to dismantle. A pawn in a much bigger game. "You were playing me the whole time," Malik said, his voice low but full of disgust. The officer chuckled darkly. "You didn't really think I was here to help you, did you? You were never meant to make it this far. This was always going to be my game." Malik's pulse quickened. He had thought he was working with someone who wanted to take down the system. But this officer, he was the system, and now he was about to pay the price. "You're not getting away with this," Malik said, his voice barely a whisper, full of determination. The officer's eyes gleamed as he pulled out a gun, the cold metal gleaming in the dim light. "We'll see about that." Malik stood firm, facing the officer with a sense of resolve that he hadn't felt in a long time. Every ounce of his being screamed to take action, to stop this once and for all, but he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. "I'm done playing," Malik said, his voice sharp and unwavering. The officer's laugh echoed through the warehouse, but it was cut short as the sound of sirens began to grow louder. The officer's smirk faltered, his eyes darting toward the sound. "We'll finish this later," the officer said, his voice low and angry. "But for now, you're not going anywhere." As Malik moved to stand tall, he knew the fight wasn't over, but it had just become a whole lot more complicated.